In this video we're going to start practicing some body mechanics work on an actual sort of character. We'll carry on applying the basic principles of animation, getting some good anticipation, follow through, and we'll work on expressing things such as the weight and all of that. But we'll do it here on this pretty simple character before we actually move on to anything more complex. And this little guy is nice and cute and also is very simple to control, having only 4 controls in his rig. There is, however, something else with this guy that is worth playing around and trying out for yourselves. And that comes back to the idea of the actual rigs themselves, how they're set up and designed to work. As I've said, I'm not going to go much into that at all throughout this whole series, as it's not really the point. However, as I've also said, the actual rig that you have for a given character has a huge impact on how you approach the animation, and also, of course, certain choices in rigging can either aid you in animation or they can completely get in the way of you performing good animation. The design and the structure of the rig itself can be very important. What you can do with this little fellow is you can experiment with the rig ever so slightly and practice animating with slightly different versions to see how they handle differently. What doing this will reveal to you is how very clearly it is that the rig can influence the way you animate, and also the fact that slightly different rig setups are suited to slightly different animations. So let's have a look specifically at what we've got here. We've got this main foot controller, and as you can see we can slide this around and this little goal up here by his neck stays in place, and of course, you know, his body, as it were, all responds there. Of course, we can grab this goal and move it around as well, and when we tip and rotate it like that, you know, bends and flexes his body, as it were, within its own space, but it is independent of the main foot. We've then got this head control here that lets us position his head around and turn it like that, and of course you'll notice that that is also independent of the foot, and of course, as we just saw, is also independent of what's going on in the body there. This is a fully broken hierarchy rig. The whole thing floats, essentially. These 3 main points are all unconnected with one another. Now, for some motions, that can be really helpful. For others, it may not be. Modifying this rig to try it in different ways is very simple. For instance, you can take the goal here, which is of course the goal there, and you can make this an immediate child of the foot item, just like that. Doing that will cause the goal to now go with the foot, so of course you can move the entire character around from this, and of course, you know, pivot it, and it all goes along. Notice, of course, that the head is still floating within its own direction. However, when you use the tip and turn control here on the foot, you'll notice that the goal does not go along, it stays put. That can also be quite handy. The head is also something that we can alter if we want, rather than having it floating about. We can take this head controller here, and what it actually controls, it doesn't control, although if you look in the list here of bones, there's a neck and a head bone. It's actually controlling the neck point itself. So if we take this and make it a sibling of the neck, so in that case it's going to be a child of this bracket 3 bone here, then of course it still controls head and neck as we would expect, but we'll see that now when the foot is tipped, it all comes along with it, and also of course when this is tipped at the goal point here, the head comes along with it, and you have to do additional posing on the head directly like this. We also see a slightly different effect on the foot tip. It doesn't flip with it, but when you roll it, you get this sort of counteraction. So it's almost as if he's, rebalancing himself. When he, tips his body off to the side, his head sort of automatically leans forwards almost. So that can be, sort of a little free piece of animation. I do urge you to try these different parentings that I've just shown you, and to try animation exercises on this character with them set up in any of the different ways. As you do this, you will discover that the keyframes that you need to set, the way you need to do in-betweening, and how easy or difficult it is to move things along, get a sense of weight, overshoot, anticipation, and all of that stuff needs to be worked through slightly differently. Doing this practice will also help you when you are, confronted with a rig that you're not familiar with, to play with the controls and start to get an idea about how you want to go about structuring the elements of your animation, how you use the controllers. But also it will give you ideas about, how to set up controllers, and so if you are making your own rigs for your characters, you will be able to think better in terms of the eventual animations you may or may not do with them, to help inform decisions about how to structure the controls on that rig. So, with that said, here is the scene that we're going to be working on, which is just a simple little hop-along obstacle course. No doubt you've seen similar things done here or there before. So we're just going to bounce him along over these things, down this ramp, and then onto a skateboard at the end, which is quite amusing. For this exercise, I am going to have a modification of the rig, and so you see that I've got the goal parented immediately under the foot here. The head has been left alone, but what is going to happen as we work on and animate this guy, when we move his foot around, that goal comes with. So all of his bounce and so forth on his body is going to be taking place within the foot space, although the head is still on a float. So let's get to work and start laying in some of our initial keyframes here. First off, what I'm going to have him do, I think, is I'm going to have him sort of, work up to his jump. So maybe a bit like a long jumper, he'll, do a little hop, bigger hop, to try and, build his momentum as he goes. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come out just momentarily to frame 5 here, and I'm just going to grab all of his controls and just key them there. No particular reason, just as I've got a static hold before we actually work into any motion, or should I say a little hold point before he lifts off. Now we will of course want to work in some anticipation, so before he lifts off we are going to want to bring him down, ready to sort of push himself forwards, but we'll work on that afterwards. So we'll leave a few more frames, let's say 10, just as we've got some room to do that afterwards. We can nudge things around later if need be. And let us start on getting him to hop. So we'll key his foot here at frame 15, and I'm going to go for a 10 frame hop, as it were, 10 frame distance. Perhaps on this first one it's going to be a shorter hop, so I'll make it 8 frames, as of course he's just building up. So we're going to have him come along, and we'll say that he's going to land somewhere around here. So that's his first 8 frame movement. Then we'll go 10, so that's going to be frame 33 here. Have a 10 frame movement to get him, let's say, to here, maybe about there. So you see he's sort of accelerating as he's hopping, building up his speed somewhat. Let's just have a look at his Z channel graph to see if that is, it is sort of speeding up there, but let's just accentuate that a little more. So I'm going to bring that one even further forward, something like that, and possibly take that one just back a little bit. So there we go, we've got this sort of acceleration curve building on him there. Give that a little play, there he goes. Oh, notice of course, in case you are following along, that I'm using linear keyframes here. We're just going to do this straight ahead, I probably should have mentioned, rather than working on stepped keys or anything like that, because it's reasonably simple. And also the way that we're building the motion, it'll help to demonstrate things as we go along whilst we're working on the body mechanics and the like. So there we've got that, and then we'll take another 10 frames, so that's going to be 43, and at this point we'll have had him make a huge hop over and onto this platform here. Perhaps he hasn't made it quite so far forward. Let's put him, at the sort of front edge of it there, like that. Okay, so let's work in the actual bounce then. So we'll come out to the halfway point between these two frames, and we'll bounce him up. We'll move him forwards a little bit than the center point, because obviously as he's traveling in midair, he is losing momentum, so he is starting to slow down. During flight, he is slowing down. So I'll have that like that, and we'll come out to the midpoint of this one, and again we'll hop him up like that, just a little bit further forwards than his halfway mark, and we'll make it higher, so he's building up his height there, and then we'll come out to the halfway point of this one, and again slightly out, and he's coming up a little bit higher again. Let's have a look at how that's sort of working. Bounce, bounce, boink. Bounce, bounce, boink. Okay, that's not bad. Now we'll start to work in some of the, movement that he's propelling himself with. Of course, he's got to be giving himself force to give himself a push, and he's going to do that with his little foot here. So I'm going to overlap that action very slightly. So rather than, of course, starting it there, we'll start it back here on frame 14, and then we'll go 1, 2, 3. So he's moving into his hop, and we'll have him pushing himself up like that. Then we'll come, of course, down to the point at which he contacts, and we'll have him hitting down on his rear edge like this. Okay, and let's do a little 1, 2 in order for him to hit flat again. Now, of course, what we see is that he's started moving up. What we haven't keyed when we've keyed these first little bounces is we haven't keyed the holds in between. Obviously he has to hit the ground, recoil and push again. So he can't just bounce instantly on a single frame. So what we can see is that we're going to have to adjust the keys on the main foot there. So let's figure out how long we're going to have him to slap down. It should be quite swift, as we've done it here with just 2 frames. So let's get the foot there. Can use the old animation toolbox just to do some copying and pasting. So what I'll do is I'll copy his pose there, and I'm going to give him a 3-frame rest on the ground, and so I'll just paste it there. And of course we wanted it to be 5 into the next high, which of course this is, so we need to come 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, grab these keys, shuttle them along, comes to his next land, we'll copy that, 1, 2, 3, paste it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's just timeline here, so we can grab those keys and shuttle them along like that. Let's check what we've got. Okay, so he does have a little rest at each point. Right, so we can finish with that little rest at each, interval keyed in. We can start working more on the foot here. So there's that. We'll go for a 1, 2, 3 to lift his foot like that, so he's pushing himself off again. We come back to the point of contact, which is here. Have him like that, contacting on the back edge, a little steeper than last time, since he's going for it a bit harder at this point. 1, 2, reset to flap him down, and then 1, 2, 3 to be pushing him off and doing so quite hard like that, and then obviously coming back into contact again and bang on his rear edge like that. And of course now he's probably overhanging a little bit, so let's just push him forward so he has actually landed properly on the thing. Good. Let's take a look at what we're getting now. We're definitely getting the feel of this little flappy foot, pushing him and propelling him upwards and forwards like that, so that's pretty good. We're liking that. Let's just do the flap down of the foot over here, because it looks a bit weird at the minute without it coming down like that, and give it another play just to double check. Okay, that's all good. Obviously the body isn't doing an awful lot at this point. We're getting a little bit of spring action in the mechanic of the body from the foot tilt, which doesn't take the neck goal piece with it. but at the minute it sort of looks a little bit overplayed really. You know, the energy in his jump isn't really coming from anywhere. It doesn't look like his little foot plate is propelling him hard enough to be giving him this kind of movement and motion. So before we start bouncing him onto the other things, we're going to start making sure that, you know, we are getting a good sense of momentum whilst we've still got relatively few keys and can make some adjustments quite easily. So that means basically animating the whole goal neck part of him. Before we lift off, he needs to have some kind of anticipation. So that's going to be the frame where his foot first begins to tilt. Then a moment before that happens, we want him to be pushing forward with his body. So let's say 2 frames before that, which would be here. He's got himself sort of pressed out to go into a jump. Let's say he only wants 3 frames to push up to that. He's going quite quickly, so this will be the rear end of his, you know, anticipation, pull himself down, ready to go. Give him a little bit of press there, maybe bring him forward some like that. Yep, that looks good. What else? We're just going to want to be holding that for a couple of frames, so let's get our toolbox back. So we can copy that pose, and 2 frames before it, we'll paste it so he's got this little hold before he starts to launch himself. And then how long to actually come down into that? Well, at the moment it's only 3. Let's make it 5, shall we? So we'll take that initial hold frame and just dodge it back there. So let's see how that's looking. Okay, not bad. Let's just roll through it manually. Okay, looks like he's sort of catching a little too early there. So really, I think we are going to want that sort of up extreme to come here. So let's grab all of those frames and just nudge them on 1, say. Or actually 2, isn't it? Because we're trying to coincide with the frame 15. So, okay, that's starting to look a little bit more like it. However, it doesn't quite look as thrustful when we do that. So what I'm going to do is on that, I'm really going to extend him up just that bit stronger like that to really give him that sense of hoof, really pushing himself. There we go. Okay, now let's look at the contact point. What we want him to do is sort of be dragging behind a little bit. Yeah, he's getting this sort of drag as, you know, his foot sort of, he throws his foot underneath himself, and he's also, you know, sort of got a bit of stretch. Again, remember the good old squash and stretch, bouncy ball type stuff. We're going for something like that. Now, do we want him stretched out throughout the whole turn? That sort of, it looks okay, but also kind of looks a bit weird. What we really want is on the midpoint is for him to be squashing a little bit. So of course, you know, his head is going one way whilst his foot sort of catches up to him. There we go. Now we can see if we just move ahead, the little zigzag sawtooth that we're getting there, that's a bad arc. That's obviously not where we want his head to be. So what we're going to do is grab it, make sure that it's slightly close in terms of position, but especially height to this, you know, keyframe where he pushed himself up towards. And what we don't want, of course, you know, he's falling down. Why would his head be pushing up? We don't want that. So of course we can let his head start to come down from that. So we, you know, copy this arc over here, which is the same arc as the foot is making, but not quite as high, which gives us the little squashed position in the middle. Okay, so as he comes down, 1, 2, 3, so this is the point where he's just getting ready to lift off again. He's of course taking the impact and he's lurching forward, of course, because he's going to be propelling himself forwards. So let's get him somewhere like that, sort of squish his butt, if you can imagine this part being his butt. Get that squished right down, ready for the hoof, and then another 1, 2, 3. We'll push him right up again, and again roll the action of his body there. So spring, and we're really seeing obviously a much nicer action there. That little clink and spring is very nice indeed. come over to his contact, which is here. We want him pulled back, stretching out, roll his action a bit, so as he's like that. Very good. Let's go to the halfway mark of it, which we'll put somewhere here, and we'll keep him squished. Actually, where we really want it is here to coincide with his high. So something like that. Obviously, this one now looks a little bit wrong, so let's take that frame and move it back one in time there. Then we have the contact 1, 2 and 3, at which point we'll have him squished down and leaning forwards again, like this. Ready to go 1, 2, press himself up, really reaching over to the contact. Have a proper trail back. Right up here in the high, we can have him really quite squished down now on this move, like that. Really smush him up a little bit. We can also have him going or travelling slightly forwards. Boing! Ah, look at that. That's gorgeous. Gorgeous little manoeuvre there. I thought I'd set this foot. Oh no, I did it wrong, didn't I? It should be 1, 2, 3. He should be in contact like that, and then of course 1, 2, 3 after would be his next lift-off point. Anyhow, ignoring that for the moment, let's see how we look. Give this a little playback. Aha! We are seeing a definite little sort of a bouncy spring action occurring there. It's looking better here on the last one. The longer the jump, the more force he puts into it, then, you know, the better it is looking. These earlier ones sort of look a little unbalanced. So let's just work on those briefly, shall we? Let's not have him force himself up quite as far forward. So let's bring him more to there. That starts to look a bit better. He also maybe doesn't need to go quite as far up, and this gives us a little bit of a better sense of bounce there. That's what's wrong here, is of course the neck is coming down, which it shouldn't really do. So let's make that in between up a bit, but let's also push him forward. So of course he's still trying to maintain that forward momentum there. That works better, and there we go. So we can see of course this same pattern that's coming in all three of these little arcs here. So let's give that another playback now. Aha! Now that, taking care of those little things, starts to look a lot more convincing. You know, you're getting much greater sense of him, you know, using both his body and his foot or legs, however you want to think about it, to, you know, propel and carry himself forward, building up little jumps there to give himself some momentum. So let's have a look, because there's also, I think, some of this maybe looks a little too sharp. Such as here, that 1, 2, 3 hard down like that. That to me seems just a little bit too strong, considering the shortness of this jump. So I'm going to actually roll that high back a frame. And you'll notice that I need to sort of just compensate that in between a little bit there for it. And the down, I'm going to make it not quite as low, but a bit more forward. And in fact, that one there, I'm going to bring further forward as well. Just tidy up that between there. Let's see if that plays a little better. Yep, that certainly does. He's not having to go through such a hard or fast movement, and owing to that I probably can squish him down a bit more here and bring him further backwards. In fact, he doesn't need to lean as far forwards. So let's see what difference that has made. Yeah, because now we get the good low down, which gives him the energy to propel himself, you know, upwards and forwards on the next. So let's see that. Aha, okay, that's looking good to me. So what we've got is we've got this good basic rhythm and this design of how the controllers interact and their actions overlap, the different parts of the body overlap, and also the way that we're using the body to, you know, create this sense of how he's generating his movement, where the force is coming from. Whilst of course still following that, you know, classic jumping guy, bouncing ball sort of mechanic to the squashing and the stretching and everything else there. We can move on then to working on the next phase of this motion. So let's see what we're going to do with him now. Let's get my toolbox out of the way there. So we've got his foot holding until this point, a little 3-frame hold again on the floor, and then we're going to go again for, let's try 10 frames. You might, in something like this, work it slightly longer because of course even though his jump time might want to remain 10 frames, he's got further to fall. So we might end up shoving this out to 11 or 12 frames. But let's see, let's go with 10 to start with and see how that works out. So we'll grab his foot and we'll bring him down to have landed on this platform here. And we'll grab his little foot tip and of course put him in the contact pose like this. We'll come to his halfway mark, which is of course where he wants to have bounded up. He's going to have bounded quite high because he's still got a bit of energy in his bounce. He's going to have come, let's say, way up here. Hang on, let me just make sure I'm not too far backwards or forwards. That would be the exact halfway, so we'll move him slightly forwards of that. There we go. And let's see what that's doing for us. Bounce, bounce, and drop. So that's quite a long drop and it's quite fast. So what I am going to do is push that out by an extra 1 frame. Okay, leaving of course the in-between where it was. He still takes the same amount of time to get up, but of course since he's got further to fall, then he has that additional frame. We can work in other stuff here as well. So we've got our 1, 2, 3 until he's in his forward crunch position there, ready to leap. Come out to the high, which is here, so that'll be where he's squashing. We'll come down to the contact, and in this one he's really going to be stretching way out, loads of pull there to really accentuate the fall. And of course before that, 1, 2, 3, we're going to be pushing him way forwards like this, get him up and have a little press action in his body. In fact, we might put this 2 frames out rather than just the 1, or rather than just the 3, sorry. And we'll bring the in-between back a little bit. What we'll then do is add an in-between here to accentuate the sense of falling, so he really is, getting pulled quite swiftly like this. And we can perhaps just move that ever so slightly forwards like this. Actually possibly backwards a bit, because of course if we imagine his head is being dragged along, then it can be being dragged along in a much more linear fashion, even though his foot will be moving in more of an arc. So let's just give that a little scrub, see how it handles. Looking quite nice. Okay, let's have a little playback of him here, see how he's looking overall. And he seems to be doing okay. Yep. Oh, that last jump and drop, that's worked out well, primarily because of our little in between there. So as he extends slightly quicker on the down drop. So we're going to have the same old hold of 3 frames here, at which point he will have started to lift himself like that, and we're going to grab the neck and bring that down for a really hard, heavy hit. He's come down a good distance, so he's taking a really hard hit at that point. Then we'll go through another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in order to put him up onto the next platform here. Again, set the rotation on his foot to contact position. Get the midpoint of his leap there, and he's having to leap up reasonably high to try and clear the next platform. He really needs here to throw himself, so want to give him a big push very swiftly like that. So he's really trying to, hoof himself up hard. Come down to the contact. We're going to have him slightly down here, because of course he's not stretched out because he hasn't been coming from such a height, he's been coming from further down. And on the midway we are going to have him the midway of his actual jump height, which is there, we are going to squish him down, have his butt come up for that. So you see, really sort of jumps like this and snags, and that pulls his rear end up. That pulls his foot up, I should say. He's using his body to throw himself out and trying to use the momentum and force of his, his head and his upper body to try and drag his lower body up and through the air and into the landing. And actually, let's have him further back for that. See how that works. No, that's wrong. He definitely needs to come forwards. And I think notably lower. Yep, there we go. So let's watch that. And spadoing. Oh yes, that works really well. See what we're getting there. Again, we talked about the backwards action. Let's just play this in reverse, shall we? It's possibly a good point here to do it. We can see that the sense of momentum and weight is also carrying reasonably well here in reverse playback. So that tells us, of course, that we are, broadly good in our sense of how we should be. I think there might be something a little weird at the high point of this jump off this first, pillar there. We'll review that as we go a little later on. Otherwise, back to our little cycle for his next jump. So we have a hold of 3 there whilst he's on the ground, at which point we, pitch his foot like that for the jump. And we do 10 frames forward from there to take him over to the next platform, which he lands on like this. And of course we bring up his little foot tilt for the contact pose once again, and then we'll jump back, grab his head, jump 1, 2, 3 frames forward so he's in the forward point there, and we're pressing him forward like this, and we're squeezing his butt down like that as he's trying to push himself off. Come to the halfway point of his jump, and let's move him up like this. He's trying to get some clearance there, a little bit forwards, maybe a little bit higher. We'll take his neck, that's his high point, so this will be the squash point in his cycle, like that, somewhere around there. Coming down to the contact, have him dragging behind slightly, so stretching back out, and of course want to have him lurching himself forwards, try and use his body weight to again pull himself, hoof himself forward to make this jump. There we go. Boing. Perhaps he can be a little further back still, so he's slightly undershot, as it were, with his head. No, I don't think so. That's slowing his head down too much, so that needs to go further forwards like this. Just adjust some of those in-betweens there, get him a different sense of squish. There we go. Boing. Yep, that's good. So again, he holds 1, 2, 3. The foot rolls back to the front tippage again, and the head comes down as he takes the impact. And then once again, we'll do a 10 frame movement to put him over here. And because he's landing on a ramp, I'm just, for the sake of simplicity, going to readjust the rotation of his foot there to line up with the ramp. That way my keyframes and so forth on the foot roll piece here will remain, basically equal. You can take the head, pull it back, quite back, good sense of stretch in it. Get the foot, come to the midpoint, or part roll it. Obviously it's rotating during this phase, but that's okay. But again, have him jumping right up like this. Head will be nice and sort of squished there, and in the main of the jump we'll push him out like this. And let's just have a peek at that, possibly 1 frame earlier, of course. Do it with the 2 and just bring him out like this. There we go. Roll to shape his body parts there. There we go. Again, we're just going to put some more drag on him here in his landing, so his head is again coming down, it's sort of lagging behind as he drops. There we go. So let's pull back and take a look at our motion all in and see how we're looking. A little bouncy bounce, boings, boings, boing. It's pretty nice. We've got a nice sort of natural bounce action going on. I think the float of his head, you know, the amount that it goes up or down by looks a little weird when he's coming up onto this pillar there. He's coming on the up jump. We'll sort of work on that in a bit. Again, that drop where he does the extra pull there, that works really well, and the same thing has worked well over here where we have him dropping to the ramp there. So we're pleased with that. Yeah. Of course, the actual hop action that's going on with his foot is looking very good and natural, and at least the timings of the bounce of his body and his head and how he's, you know, taking the weight on a landing and pushing himself up when he's trying to lift off, all of that's working out nicely, even if there's a couple of the small details that we might just want to tweak a little bit. Right, so our next bit is a little bit of fun then, as he sort of does this rail ride down. So since he's not immediately going to be jumping, we're going to have him slide for a moment. Let's do a 1-2 frames to flatten his actual foot there. Let's also think about how swiftly we're going to bring him down. Well, he has of course been falling here, so he's going to maintain some of that acceleration. We're going to assume a little bit of friction between his foot and the slide, so that'll sort of counteract the acceleration a little bit. But of course, as he continues to slide, he'll probably pick up acceleration. We can sort of look at the distances he's travelled so far and say, okay, so here's a 10 frame distance and this equates to a 10 frame distance, so we can sort of look at that and see that that's almost the length of the ramp here. The length of the rail is more or less equivalent to one of these up-down cycles. So we'll say that from this point on until near the end of the ramp, that will be about 10 frames. That seems reasonable. Of course, we can always tweak it afterwards if we find ourselves needing to tweak the timing at all. So after 10 frames, he's slid himself all the way down here. I think what we'll also have is he'll have sort of be leaning himself back a little bit to try and, keep himself balanced, not, tipping forward and coming off. But of course, after he hits here, 1, 2, let's say 3, we really should have him, of course, taking the force of that impact. So he's partly still, trailing at this point, because he's, his head is sort of lagging, dragging behind his motion, because he's still slipping and sliding down, but at the same time he's also impacted something, so he's, his head's going to be pushing down. So that's an interesting and slightly different kind of overlap. You see what we get doing that? You see, it still trails behind as he begins sliding, but it's sort of a little out of sync. And then perhaps by the end here, he is planning to, of course, jump again. So he has probably brought himself forward like this, getting ready to give himself a little pop. Yep, look at that. Just like a skier. If you've ever seen, of course, guys doing the ski jump and whatnot, where they go off the end of the ramp and they fly through the air, and then they come to land on the runoff at the end on the slope. And of course they come in, trailed like that, hit down, crunch, lean forward, to stabilize themselves and remain in motion. That's a perfect little example of what we're essentially trying to do here. We can even perhaps push him ever so slightly further forwards like this by the time he comes to the end, like that. Very nice, just like little slalom skier. He's taking off there. So let's have a look at how that plays. Oh yeah, and that's really timed in nicely. We get that same sense of, continuous momentum from his jump and into the slide there. Pretty happy with that. And then of course, at this point, he's going to be starting to catapult himself off. So I'm going to say that 1 frame before that, we're going to hold his foot, and 1, 2, 3, he'll have a big push on his foot, and again we'll just come to there, and it's only going to be a short hop this time, but he might try and go for a bit of height to land on the board. So let's just stick with the full 10 once again, just to see how it works out, and we shall reset the rotation on his foot piece itself, the actual foot controller, and we'll move him, land him on the skateboard, come to a halfway mark there, pop him up, so he's really, jumped himself up and forwards. Can rotate that foot plate at this point if we want. We're coming, of course, to the contact on the skateboard. The foot roller is rolled back here. The neck is dragging up here somewhat, like that. We'll take that last neck that we did here then, and we're going to move it back one frame. That way we'll have 1, 2, 3 as he pushes himself up and forwards, trying to escape from the ramp. Come to the high point in his jump there, let him take the squash, very nice. Of course, roll his backside there like that, lovely. 1, 2, 3. Let's already have him slightly extended or somewhat extended, so he's dragging back again. So he's again dropping to a different level of height. So we see he's coming, whoosh! Look at that, lovely little takeoff from the end of the ramp, coming down onto the skateboard. Like that a lot. Let's play it back. It's going whee! Very nice little movement there. Come on, here we go, bouncy bounce, bounce, oh slide, pop, down. Wonderful. Looking really nice. So what's he do as soon as he hits this skateboard? Well, we're going to say 2 frames to go slam flat forwards like that. We've got his neck there. We'll go 1, 2, 3 again, just like before, as he comes down and takes the impact and the overshoot. And what we'll do as well at this point is we shall grab the skateboard and also his foot, and we'll say that as he hits there and is just about to come down into that initial point, of course some of his forward momentum is going to transfer into the skateboard as he hits it. His foot plate grips it with friction, but he still has forward carriage, he still has forward momentum, and because the skateboard is on wheels, some of that momentum is going to get transferred into it. So we'll put a key there, and then let's go say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames later, we'll have rolled them both forward some, like this. Again, we can look at the key spacings here on his jump, because of course that gives us an idea of how fast he was moving forward, and so we'll try and get a lot of that speed into the board there, so it takes off with a little bit of speed. Then will come another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 say, and we'll push it forward some more, only we'll be starting to decelerate it ever so slightly now. And we can check what that looks like on the Z position here. It wants bringing back just a scotch there. Do another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, let's say. Start bringing it further forward, but again constantly decelerating. Let's again just check the Z position there, and this is more or less what we are starting to see, is this continuation forwards but with some deceleration going on. Let's actually just grab both of these keys at that point and start to decelerate him there. And I'm even going to do another little chunk of distance here, wherein I'll move them both forwards, but again getting slower and slower as it goes. So let's just roll that on back, and off he rides. Not bad. Let's just watch it in motion. Yeah, sploing. There we go. Look at that. Really nice sort of little motion there as he lands on the board, and he's off. Might take off a little fast in that first moment. Let me just see. Yeah, I think he does. Just takes off just a little bit quickly. So let's just pull that back a bit. That of course will also come back. That must also then come back slightly. And finally so must that. So let's see if that's any noticeably better. Aha, that's a bit more like it. I think that's just about the right sense of weight and push coming out from his impact into the roll. So you could talk that a couple of different ways, I suppose, but personally I quite like it. So I think that's broadly what I'm going to stick with in terms of that there. So the only other thing then is, of course, he's not just, slamming down and stopping, so we'll give him a 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll sort of roll a bit more forwards from that impact, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He can begin to, right himself, get some standing, and another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He can have brought himself up a bit more as he's sort of balancing himself on the board like this. Let's see how that looks. There we go. And let's check it in motion. Sploing. Yeah, not bad. Let's have another little look. Maybe looks a little bit slow or something. I'm not really sure. I think we might just speed both of those moves up a little bit to right him a bit faster. So I'll shrink each of those spaces by 2 frames. That gives him a total of 6 on each, so a 12 frame writing. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And of course, again, it doesn't just stop dead. So let's, as he writes himself, let's have him go a little too far backwards like that. And then over the course of another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames, we'll have him write himself again a little bit more forwards like this, perhaps a little bit further up. Let's see how that plays, shall we? So you go spoing, there we go. Okay, reasonably happy with that. So let's shuttle on back to the beginning then, and we'll have a peek at the piece in its entirety and see how we're looking. Bouncy, spoing, doink, doink, whee, doink. That's pretty good. I quite like that. It's got a certain amount of, pop and character and cartoonfulness to it that's, really quite appealing. As we've pointed out along the way, there's a couple of those little moves that could probably use some work, but there's also a good couple along the way that are, really nice, really shining. I particularly like that coming off the end of the ramp and onto the board. There's a real little spring in that I think is just gorgeous. Look at that, beautifully timed. I think that's really nice. So we'll have a look furthermore here then at just doing some little tidy ups to see where perhaps we might have been going wrong, and of course can also examine some of those moves where we've got things looking really good and right. So okay, what's the exact pattern here that I really need to be trying to copy or emulate somewhere else? So giving this a review then, it does become a little more obvious once we start thinking about it, about why certain things just look a little weird and where the problems are. A good example is here, coming off the low pillar onto this slightly higher one. What we have, of course, is this 10 frame cycle from lift off to land, 5 to the high and then 5 to land again. But of course, what happens there, because he's not going down so far to land, is that his rate of descent is effectively very slow. When we're in full playback, you don't immediately see it. It's not that obvious, but if you watch it over and over, it does, of course, become increasingly obvious that there's a definite slowdown in that. So how can we deal with that? Obviously, we could just shorten the amount of time that he takes to drop. That would, help us out there. But of course, at this point would require, a lot of nudging about of all of these later keys. However, it's not so much the 10 frames that's wrong. It's not really the timing of the, beginning and end of that jump action. It's the spacing of it. So what we really want to do is we want to, of course, observe the fact that he's got to jump up high, and so he needs more time to climb, but then he's only falling a short distance, so he needs less time to fall. And the easiest way to do that is just to take our in-between high frame here and nudge it forward in time by 1. So now he's got a 6 frame climb followed by a 4 frame fall. What's also handy, the fall is a bit shallow. Of course, he is trying to make it up a height here, but he does give himself a good launch. So what we can also do is take this high point and, in fact, just make it slightly higher. So as he's going to get a bit more bound into his action there. That then creates a much better sort of appearance to what we've got going on. We want this, squished up position, of course, to still occur on the high, so that goes there now. And we can perhaps push it back a little bit like this, and then of course as he's coming down we can afford to stretch him out more again, so this will add to the sense of bounce. And there we go, that's looking more natural. Perhaps that's just a little too stretched, so we can say that he's, well, maybe it's not stretched enough, I don't know. Let's just have a little look, shall we, and see what it looks like if we push him up more. Does that help or hinder? Personally, I think that hinders because it slows down the movement of his head. We want to keep the movement of the head going apace, so let's bring it something like that, which of course also helps play into the fact that he's taken this jump up and has had a shorter landing distance. There, that looks better to me. So he comes down. It's not so much that we're stretching him up, we're stretching him back a little bit as well. It's as if he's having to sort of throw his foot under himself to be able to catch that landing point. Similar thing here, going between these two. They're a very similar height, but the height that he's making his jump isn't that great. So I think I'm going to do a slightly similar thing. I don't really need to retime it, but I am going to sort of lift it so he gets a bit more bounce into his action. That sort of limbers him up a bit. He is kind of cartoony, so doing that does help us here. And again, I'm just going to have a little peek at my action here. A bit more stretch in his come down there, so we like that. So let's have a playback, see if that's given us a little improvement. That definitely has done. That's definitely more, in keeping, working well. Yeah, that's much more natural. I would say that I perhaps see something similar going on when he's coming off that and into here. Perhaps we can do a similar thing there. So again, I'm going to find this midpoint. I'm going to raise him up a bit like that. He's really going for a big bound. There we go. And to help accentuate that, then of course I'll have the neck extend out like this before the landing, and so we get something more like that, which I quite like the look of, I do believe. I'm actually going to say, yeah, I do approve of this. We're going to turn him up more from this point, so bring him back a bit at his mid-squish cross there, and also start to extend him out a little bit quicker. So 2 frames after his high there, I'm going to pull him back, and that gives his head a little bit of hover whilst his body flits around underneath. And I'll also do a similar thing here as well. 2 frames, I'll start to pull him up a bit and give him a bit more there as well, and work into broadly the same thing here. Have him extending a little earlier on like that, so that gives him just that little bit of lag on the head, as it were. So let's give that whole thing a playback and we'll see how he's looking now. Boing, 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 boing. That's much better. See, those little adjustments that we've made on the head there really do give that better sense of bounce, that little springiness, creating that extra in between that drags his head back just that little bit quicker as his foot starts to fall. So that's all pretty good. What else can we look at here? Well, we've of course got the foot action itself. That's currently very basic. That's just land to lift that we've got working on there. So we can look at how we're going to have him rotating his foot over the time. See if perhaps we need something for him to preempt or even post-empt his moves. For instance, I might say that really I want to turn it back a little bit here to give that sense of him really lifting his foot up. This gives him a sense of a bit of drag on the foot there, you see, and also starts to, because of course the neck doesn't go up with the foot action there, that also of course starts to move him into the squish a little bit earlier as well. Especially on the big ones here, can really put some trailing onto his foot, although of course trying to be careful not to intersect him with himself too much. Again, nice long jump there, can really push his foot out and very much begin to preempt the drop there. Oh, I appear to have that a frame out. That should really be here. Of course, let's really bring that up on this point to give him a real hard slam down like this. Here, where he's really extended, push him up. Again, can have him pressing a bit more there. Down for perhaps a even harder landing here. And there, really have him trailing that foot behind. Off this last one, have him coming into a real sort of angle here, and then we can move the flat, let's say one frame along, because obviously it's no longer coming down to flat, it's coming to below what flat would be. And again, that's the lift off point, so somewhere around here we'll really get him into a squish, and again for contact make it quite hard. Bam. I'm also going to work through these contacts, because of course he comes in and it's 1, 2 down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to accelerate that, so as we have the initial one is quick and then there's just a little bit to go. That'll make his impact of the foot just that little bit punchier. So again, let's watch here. Bring it down like that. Come to the next. Bring it down like that. To the next. Come here. Bring it down only a bit, because obviously that's quite a high one. To the next. That's already pretty quick. Again, come here. Have it almost flat. Little slow there, but having accelerated by this point, then slamming in there, and then again come here, almost flat and flat. So let's give that a little playthrough, see how he looks. Bam, bam, bang, bang. Certainly a lot punchier. Let's go and watch the piece as a whole here, and I think that that works out pretty well. Those extra bits of spring, it can perhaps be a bit hard to see where the foot is, so I'll just turn off the wireframe so as it's not black, it's white and more obvious where it is. There we go. Yeah, that little extra action on his foot there I definitely think has served well to give him just that little bit of additional sense of movement there, that little bit of extra work that he's putting in from his foot to try and launch himself and of course catch himself, and the extra bit of speed on the clap down when he lands during each cycle of bounce. I think that all works out pretty well. Next thing then that we haven't touched yet is the head, the actual head control itself. That's bouncing the whole time, and largely we do want to have it, hold a certain amount of level. That's pretty good, but we will put just a little bit of turn on it, and often we'll tend to counteract that with the body, so we'll have this counter movement going on. So we can have it holding there at 5, that's fine when he starts to come down. When he comes into the rest here, let's tip it back. Obviously the body is tipping down and forward, so we'll tip the head back and up, hold it till there, get up just into the high point here-ish. We'll tip it forwards a little bit, come down toward the landing, start to level it, bang bang, into his crouch, have it come backwards, drawing up into his high, tip it down a little bit. As he starts to make contact, we'll begin to level it off, and then as he pitches forward and down like that, we'll tip it upwards and back again. So you get the general pattern that we are going for here. We are sort of counteracting his head to what his body is really doing. So that gives him a little extra sort of bounce, as it were. The head isn't so much working to produce the bounce, it's sort of, holding on to itself to try and go against. Not really go against the bounce, it's not trying to counteract it, it's just sort of working with it and receiving motion from it. Particularly noticeable, of course, you see he comes down here and the head tips back. It's part of his whole balancing, as he's trying to keep his body in balance while still throwing, force through it. So to the high, tip down, coming into the contact there, we're level, but because this is a long drop, it'll actually put him a little further tipped down at this point, so he's sort of looking where he's going to land, giving himself that bit of visual anticipation. Of course, coming into the crunch there, back and up, again coming up to the high, tip it down, coming into the land, begin to level it out some, coming into the the crouch, the crunch, tip it back, just the same pattern here each time, rolling that over and over. There we go, land, levelish, to the crunch, tipped back, high, tipped forward, and a good way forward because again he's spotting the ramp, he's trying to see where it is, levelling out by the land, but again we'll have a little overhang of him looking down and forwards, then get down into the impact there, start to bring that head levelish. Of course this is a longer hold because he's sliding, keep it tipped back right until the last moment, up he goes, looks down, spotting the skateboard, sort of holds it still quite down until about here, comes to the impact, getting towards level, and 1, 2, 3 down, rolling backwards, give it a 2-frame hold there as he's, rolling onwards, start to bring it forwards again, and as he starts to right himself, we'll level the head off, and there we go. So let's have a look at how that head action now plays into our full movement. Here we go, and squit, squit, look at that. Lots more bounce, a lot of life coming now through the head. We really get that sense of him actually knowing what he's doing, that movement on the head. He's sort of looking even more active, especially of course when you see him coming into the long drop and of course landing on the skateboard, the way that he looks down and he points his attention at it. This really starts to give the sense of mood, or purpose rather, I should say. The character is thinking about what he's doing now, he's thinking about where he's moving. So not only have we got this nice basic little body mechanic with nice timing, this good sense of bounce and movement and the forces that are acting on him, we're also starting to now, just with this simple one action of the head, start to layer on actual character, intention, and of course get a sense of his emotion, his reasoning, his thinking. And so there we see all of these parts coming together to make up our little character animation. From here, everything should be pretty simple. Of course, we're all in linear keys, so what we want to do is go and turn all of these now into TCB splines. So we'll just select TCB and use the set curve tool. That converts everything to a TCB spline. What we will have, of course, is we will have some slide on the odd part due to the slide interpolation, like here. He goes into the ramp, goes below it. We can apply the quick clean filter. That'll take care of some of that for us. Some bits like this, obviously, on the slide there are a bit trickier, but holds where he is actually contacting on the ground there. His foot is no longer sliding, so that's good. So let's get on the foot controller and just come into the graph editor here, because this is going to be a mix of the Y and Z at this point. And what we really want to do is to start throwing both of them there into tension 1, and you can see how that straightens out this point in between. It also of course tightens up the slam down and the pop off there. So we should find that an awful lot of this animation now looks pretty good, and we probably don't have to do an awful lot else. Of course, that is because it is reasonably simple, and a lot of the time what you would do after converting into spline is you maybe do a little bit more tweening in spline mode, or you'd maybe go in and start making some adjustments to some of the curves, which of course, working on other things, we will see as we move along. But now that we get the spline action, look at that, the bounce, the sense of action that we've got going on there in him is even more exaggerated. So working from the straight ahead in linear mode and getting, what looked like nice action even just with linear keyframes, once we spline it up straight away, we're getting a very nice look to our animation. It really pluses it an awful lot for us. So there we go, a nice simple little project to work through with lots of examples of anticipation, timing, overlap, follow through, weight, speed, momentum, as well as starting to work in with the basics of body mechanics and also injecting a little bit of character to try and show some of the thought processes that are going on, and of course making this character perform the actions that he is performing. And all in all, I hope you'll agree we've got quite a nice outcome for ourselves here.